Good morning. My name is Rabbi Ilyse Kramer, and I work as one of the chaplains at the Department of Corrections here in Wilmington, at the Plummer Community Correctional Center and at Hazel D. Plant Treatment Center. But in addition, I work with Jewish offenders, men and women, who reside at the Sussex Correctional Institute, over at James T. Vaughan, and women who are at the Baylor Women's Correctional Institute. I wanted to speak a little bit about my work with men and women who are imprisoned, who very much resonate to the teachings and the learnings in the book of Exodus in particular, especially around Passover time. Wanted to share some of the learnings as well as the teachings that I've discovered together with these men and women, as I think it resonates deeply in these troubling times in our own lives, but most especially to remind ourselves that freedom is found both within as well as without regard to our particular physical circumstances. In Hebrew, Yetziat Mitzrayim, the leaving of Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, it functions both as a historical marker as well as an event in Jewish history in the creation of what becomes the Jewish people. In this way, Exodus is a pivotal experience that goes on to create a series of foundational moments where in leaving Egypt, the Israelites not only find their freedom, but in addition, they find a way of framing ultimate meaning in the world, both in their encounter with God at Mount Sinai afterwards, as well as in their wanderings together in the desert for 40 years. Mitzrayim is found in those narrow places of our lives when breathing is difficult and we might be overwhelmed. Yetziat Mitzrayim is the leaving, the exodus of finding ways to get out of those narrow places. Also, as a people, the question gets raised, so what is freedom all about? What is freedom for? Is this a kind of freedom to do whatever you want? Or is this a freedom asking a different question altogether? That is, freedom is for what purpose? In particular, to the men and women in the conversations that we had, this question in particular is very prominent and always on their mind. What is true freedom? And how can one gain one regardless of one's physical, geographic locations? Freedom from oppression itself is certainly important, but it also is freedom to do what and to become what in the world in which we live, in the place and the location in which we find ourselves. Torah teaches us about unfolding stages of freedom. It begins with the leaving of Egypt. It gets deepened in the desert wandering experience of becoming a community and a people. It gets expanded to include a way of living and responding to the words of a commanding God at Mount Sinai, and then raises hopes and dreams for redemption or completion or starting over of new beginnings upon entering into the land, a land promised back in the days of Abraham. For the men and women, this type of understanding of freedom for something, not simply freedom to do whatever one feels like, is most core. Mitzrayim, Egypt, as we mentioned, in Hebrew means narrow constriction. The word itself comes to symbolize the inner straits that continue to trap our souls. And in fact, each generation, we're taught that we carry that kind of brokenness within us, and to address it at all times in the ways we live our lives, the choices that we continue to make, and in the ways we address all people and in the world in which we live. One teaching that particularly resonated with the men, especially at the Sussex Correctional Institute, was taught by Nachman of Bratslav, Rabbi of the Bratslaver Hasidim from the 18th century. He teaches, in fact, the exodus from Egypt occurs in every human being, in every era, and yes, even each and every day. And at our tables during the Passover Seders, we recited, in every generation, a person is obligated to look at oneself as if he or she has left Egypt. It's a phrase recounted and sung throughout the generations and recited in the Haggadah table itself, not only as a past reminder of some historical kind of moments or some kind of litany or liturgy that we recite again and again, but in fact as a reminder to wake up each day to realize that we are obligated to take a look at ourselves and to see how we leave Egypt each and every day. Rabbi Irving Greenberg describes it in his book, The Jewish Way. The Exodus is a core event of Jewish history and religion. The central moment of Jewish religious history is in fact Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt. In this event, a group of Hebrew slaves were liberated in the past. The initiative for freedom had come from God, for the slaves were so subjugated that they accepted even their fate of genocide. But Moses, called by God, comes to Pharaoh with a request that the slaves be given a temporary release to go worship in the desert. Again, step by step, the power of Pharaoh was broken. Step by step, the temporary release escalates in a demand for freedom. Thus, Torah makes a point that the entry of God into history is also about human dignity and the rights to freedom, and foreshadows the end of absolute power within all of its abuses. The Exodus inaugurated a biblical era of the Jewish people's history, and in Jewish teaching, the Exodus is not a one-time event, but a norm by which all of life should be judged and guided. The Exodus is an orienting event, an event that sets in motion and guides the Jewish way towards a promised land. For the men and women who are in our facilities, being able to aspire to their promised land is essential to keeping themselves centered and grounded each and every day, and to hold on to hope and to light for a different and better future for themselves and their own families. I wanted to share in the minutes that we have left one last piece of Torah that resonated in a very different way for me from teaching this text. There's a midrash, an interpretation of the verses in Exodus that say this. The verse is, "And Moses said to the people, 'Do not fear. Stand still and see the salvation of God that he will show you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall never see them again. God will fight for you, and you shall be silent.'" The four verbs here, stand still, never see them again, fight for you, and you shall be silent, gets interpreted in Jewish tradition by the Midrash in a variety of ways. But it's these interpretations for the men and women that I work with that understood it in their own way. Midrash says one group felt they could not win this battle, so rather than be captured alive, they wanted to commit suicide by casting themselves into the sea. To this, our Midrash says, stand still. There are, in fact, men and women who do give up, who feel that they cannot reach that place of freedom. They can't win their battle, and so they too give up. Another group of Jews decided to return to Egypt and to surrender. Go back to the place at least that you knew. To them, the response was, the Egyptians whom you've seen today, you shall never see them again. And the question gets raised by the men and women who are imprisoned. What question does it mean to not return to Egypt? What promise do we need to make ourselves to not return to that kind of narrow place again? Either the narrow places of being in the location themselves or the return to the prisons again of which they've been imprisoned. A third group desired to go to battle, but instead Moses tells them, God will fight for you, for and with you. There are a group of men and women who tell me, chaplain, I get God in here. I can hear God's voice and feel that God's with me and for me in this place. And the fourth group, for those who wanted to simply pray, Moses said, be silent, meaning the prayers by themselves are not alone. In community and in study and in conversation together, we create a space for freedom to be found, to be believed in, and a place to be able to orient and center oneself for the next journeys that lie ahead. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Rabbi Ilyse Kramer, Department of DOC Chaplain. Have a good morning.